And this car is one of those forever cars for me. Moving to the inside, so the chemicals we're going to use are here. Hey guys, it's Cam here. Welcome back to the build room. In last week's episode, you would have seen player 2 has entered the game. So in today's episode, we're going to be revealing the mysteries of the green RA28. So stick around and check it out. Okay, so first things first, by the time you guys are watching this, it will be 2022. So Happy New Year. I hope you had a good celebration and you're not too dusty today. Secondly, you might notice the garage is moved around. We're making some changes and doing some upgrades. I'll give you more information on that in a future episode. But for today, we have an RA28 to focus on. Now, if you haven't watched the last 3 episodes, you should definitely do that first. So go back and watch those. I'll link to them right here. But yeah, in those ones, we looked at a manky old RA28 Celica that we dubbed the Celica. We got it running, we got it driving, and then we ripped the motor out and announced that it was going into the green one. And the green RA28 is a car that I've had for quite a while and I've been squirreling away from the channel. It was going to be a future series, but to be honest, I've brought it forward because I have plans for it in the meantime. Now, I'll explain those plans more at the end of the episode, but for now, let's jump out into the driveway and check out this absolute ripper of a project. So for those of you who have been watching the series from the start, you may recall that my first car was a TA23. So I started my vehicle ownership with a Celica, and I'm hoping when I shuffle off this mortal coil, I will still have this particular one, barring any major unforeseen events. But I basically want to do a full rotisserie rebuild on this thing, and that is going to take a significant amount of time. And I started the channel with Violet Crumbles, so that might mean that this thing needs to be put to the side for quite a few years. There's a couple of issues with that. Firstly, it's very difficult to move around. This car doesn't run, so I'm continually towing it around the place, which is just a pain. And also, this car is not going to last in the condition that it's in if I don't do something to protect it. So there is a little bit of work here that needs to be done to make this watertight. And we're also going to try and get it moving again. So I'm not going to run you through the car fully right now because it needs a good clean out. It's full of parts inside and cobwebs. So I'm going to give it a clean up and we'll push it down the driveway and then take a closer look. All right, so here it is, bottom of the driveway, a little bit cleaner than it was before. Wouldn't call it detailed or anything, but it's an RA28 Fastback Celica. It was originally, I bought it all green, so both of the guards in the bonnet I've switched out, which are the green panels that you saw on the other RA28, and basically I've swapped these ones in because they're better than the other ones. As to how much better, that's questionable, but yeah, this bonnet's quite good on the undersides. There's not a lot of rust there, so other than that, it's pretty good. And then this guard here is actually, I believe it was a new old stock. Bought it from a friend who had been dutifully keeping it in his garage clean for quite some time, and then I bolted on the car and left it out in the rain. So that was stupid of me, but we'll probably do something to make sure that doesn't degrade any further. You can see this door here. This has got the telltale rust signs. It's been welded up before, and yeah, clearly it's torn all the way through. It should have more structure than that. Moving around the car, really rust-wise, it's not too bad. It's actually very good, I would say. I don't know what they were doing with this. They've obviously pulled the pinstriping off the car at some point and then decided to bog it up rather than sand it back. I have no idea what's going on there, or maybe they were trying to get the body line back in, who knows. Rear end's pretty good. Some jackass badged it at the front of my house. Bumper on this one's really good. There's only one little dent just down here. A little bit of rust starting to come through under the fuel filler, inside the guards and things like that. It's all pretty good. And then the roof on this one is excellent as well. So there's a little bit of rust starting here, but other than that, this looks pretty much perfect, and I can't really see any evidence of repairs underneath the paint. So hopefully there's not a lot of sins being hidden. And this door here is passable. Moving to the inside, which is really the impressive thing on this. It's actually pretty complete and in pretty decent condition. So, we've got a full dash there, including things like the fuse box cover, all the pipe work. We're missing the center console panel here, but I do have that in storage. Obviously there's no shift boot or gaiters because there's no shifter. But yeah, these seats are, I don't know, it looks like they've been retrimmed at some point, probably in the same material that they did the dash in. You can see the dash is faded, but not cracked. So that's a win. But yeah, the seats look good, as do the back ones. I mean, obviously the fading is an issue on the fronts and on the dash. These are pretty much protected, except for the top there, which is, you know, where all Celica's seats break up. Trim wise, there's some elements that used to be brown that have been painted black, but generally speaking, it's pretty complete and pretty good in terms of what we've actually got to work with here. So let's have a look under the bonnet. There's no front hinges, so I just have to pull this off. All right, and this is what's under the hood, a 1G GZE engine, which is a 2-litre 6-cylinder supercharged motor. Before you get too excited, this engine is not staying in the car. It's a very old engine, they're hard to get parts for, just troublesome in general. You have to spend a lot of money on them usually to get them running if you're not a 1G expert and don't have supplied a heap of parts. And there's an even bigger reason this is not staying in the bay, but I'll show you that once we get it out because it'll be easier to explain. Now, I believe this car had been running an 18RG, and there is some evidence of that, like having the throttle linkage on this side of the car. Because the carb is for an 18RG, it's a cross flower on this side, whereas the 18RC has everything on this side, as you guys will have seen. So yeah, I think it was running an 18RG, and it was just an everyday car that was doing a little bit of light track duty. And a couple of guys that were actually brothers, I think, decided to do this swap, but never got to finishing it. And that puts us in kind of a unique position with this car in that, yes, it's a project car, clearly. I mean, you know, the paint alone screams project, but you've seen the interior, and the interior looks pretty damn good. And the engine bay, other than having the 1G in it, and the 1G engine is actually pretty special when it comes to RA series Celicas in terms of conversions, and they were really quite popular because you can have the engine mount here on the block, or you can have it mount on that second set of holes further back. So to mount this engine in this car, this is the standard cross member, standard engine mounts on the engine, and it just bolts in. I think they might have had to make a custom gearbox cross member, but when we jack this thing up, we can check that out as well. So that gives me a pretty interesting option here. We've got a car that is largely rust-free and almost roadworthy. It has a nice interior that could be a daily driver if I wanted to. It just doesn't have an engine, which is why we've pulled the engine out of the other car. So yeah, that 18RC is gonna go into this engine bay. Now there's a couple of things that I'm not happy about with the bay, and that is that it was previously repainted black all through, and under that black was a layer of green in some of the areas. I would imagine that they just probably painted the tops of the strut towers and this back area across here, and that was painted the same green as the car, but neither of the paint jobs were done well. You can see the green is actually lifting here. Because the paint underneath it hadn't been prepped, and there's clearly doesn't look like there's any primer, and if there is, it's a very thin layer. And then that was painted over with the black. Now, the good thing about bad paint jobs is you can sometimes reverse them. So we're going to rip this engine out, and then we're going to see what we can do with the bay, but we've got some time, so let's just get stuck into it and see how we go. Okay, so you can see there's some out of place angle line here. That's obviously the adapter that they've made to get that gearbox cross member into the RA28 mount holes. The surprising thing is we actually have a tail shaft, so I'm gonna have to take that out as well. Yay for me. But yeah, we're gonna get this gearbox cross member out of the way. But once we get this free from the body, we'll be ready to employ the picker. All right, so this is a gearbox cross member. It's a standard cross member, and they've just taken some angle iron and extended it. And it's amazing what just an extra inch can do. All right, and as for the tail shaft, we don't need to remove the entire tail shaft, so we don't have to unbolt it from the diff. I'm just gonna unbolt the center section, and then we should be able to slide the yoke out of here. All right, so we've got the picker in place, and this is set up to put most of the weight over the middle of the engine because we've got the gearbox on the end of it. When I was lowering this down, I just had to quickly like sort of lower it an inch and then get up and just lower the jack under the gearbox as well. So I didn't want to jackknife the gearbox into the chassis, but we should be ready to pull. Alright, so the engine is out. That was all of about an hour of work, and I did say that I would show you guys why I chose to replace this engine, and that is that. So you shouldn't really be able to see the crank like that in an ideal situation. So basically the engine mounts are great on these things if you want to get it mounted into the bay, but the sump won't clear the cross member. So obviously the guys that were doing this took the sump off to get the engine in place so they could check out, I guess, the fit and how it was all going to lay out. But unfortunately, they never got around to getting a sump back on. And so for however long this has been sitting, that engine has been exposed to the constant temperature fluctuations and things like that. And you know, you can see the surface rust just on the crank itself, but all of the rings on this engine are going to be shot. I would be surprised if the bores are in reasonable condition. I will probably pull this motor apart at some point just to see how bad it is, but you know, realistically, this is not going to be a quick and easy proposition by any stretch of the imagination. So out it comes. Luckily, it did come with a sump, so I'm just going to throw that on now so this is a bit easier to store. Perfect, it's ready for eBay as a reconditioned motor. All right, so the engine is out and the bay looks a lot better than I expected. There's a couple of things. Firstly, it looks like we've got a bigger than normal sway bar in there. And it also looked like we might have a big brake setup on this as well. I mean, I'd have to take the wheels off to confirm, but they look bigger than normal to me. And the calipers, not that we can see them from this angle, but they look different to the ones on Violet Crubbles. So yeah, now it's just a case of what I want to do with this, and I'm going to try and get all of this black paint off, I think, and the green paint up here, see how close I can get it back to looking stock. And then there are some areas that are a little bit rusty, like under the clutch and brake areas, which is pretty standard considering brake fluid does a number on paint. Now, in terms of getting the paint off, when I was degreasing this, some of the looser stuff just sprayed off with the pressure of the gun. Now, I don't think I'm going to be that lucky on the whole lot, but what I'm going to do is just try a bunch of different, I guess, chemicals on this and see if I can loosen that black up without damaging the green underneath it. So the chemicals we're going to use are here in the order of potential damage to the paint. So we've got white spirits, metho, mineral spirits or mineral terps, and then we've got wax and grease remover, carb cleaner, and then 2K base coat thinners. So I think probably about until here we should be okay in terms of not damaging the paint with, you know, a short dwell time. We're going to put this on and leave it for a day. These two I think may eat into the original factory paint because it was an acrylic. So we'll set this up on time lapse and see how we go. Alright, so that one's actually pretty good. That was the carby cleaner. Doesn't seem to have damaged the green paint. Doesn't look like I've got any clear paint rubbing off on this, just the black. So that might be a possibility. I'm just going to try a little bit more intensively there. And you can kind of see as we look down there, the paint's actually running. So the carby cleaner is definitely eating into that paint. right, so I've hit the entire bay with the pressure washer, and while it doesn't look perfect, it looks a heap better. Check it out. So basically all of the black paint, or at least 95% of it, is gone, and it looks awesome. I even managed to get rid of the green paint that was around the tops of the strut towers. So we've just really got the areas where the paint's come off through either rust or through, you know, little chips and dents and things like that. But that looks like original patina as far as I'm concerned, so I'm really happy with that. There's only two things that are really a problem. Firstly is I couldn't get this green off up here. I don't know whether it was primed underneath or something, but it's a lot more hardy than the black was. And then there's this thing. And if I pull this little guy to the side, that is what we're left with where the battery used to be. Now looking at it really closely, if I get really close, you can see there's cross hatching here. So that shows that this area and probably all of this area through here has been sanded at some point. And we've also got some welded area around the mounts for the bumper. So one of two things has happened here. Either a battery's exploded and this has had to be repainted, or it's had a really light tap and there's been a little bit of welding needed to be done and a little bit of panel beating in here. But the fronts of these are in pretty good nick, as is the other side of it. So whatever it was is probably pretty minimal. Now the next stage for this is going to be just this cross member, the sway bar, and these mounts for the, whatever they're called, the caster rods. They look particularly bad. The cross member not so much, but definitely these. I'm just going to quickly sand this stuff back and give it a coat of black spray paint. And similarly, I'm going to sand in here and coat it with the same black spray paint that I used on the calipers and things like that. It's just a satin black. It won't look too bad, especially with the battery tray and a battery in here. You'll barely notice it. So yeah, I'm gonna break out the sanders and get stuck into this, and we'll get a very rough coat of fresh black paint. If I'm feeling squirrely, I might even pull the headlights off and just redo the black on the front here, because this will take an extra 5 minutes at best. Alright, so the underbody of the car looks pretty good. Way better than Violet Crumbles. I actually can't see any bits that I really do need to patch here. I know there's some areas in the wheel wells, but it doesn't look like anything on the underbody at this point in time. So what I'm going to try and do is keep it that way until I get a chance to get this thing on a rotisserie. So all of these areas that normally sit around the gearbox, they don't get a lot of moisture or weather in here, but they do get some. So what I'm going to do here is just really lightly and easily, just while I've got the gearbox out, I'm going to give it a fresh coat of underbody deadener. So the trans tunnel area is done, at least up where the gearbox will be, and it looks pretty good. So much so that I think I'm just going to crack on and work on the other surrounding areas. I won't record that bit though, because it's really cramped quarters under here and it does get hard to work with the camera under here in my way. So let's just regroup when I'm done. All right, while we're working here, I just want to show you guys a tip that I actually learned from Home Built by Jeff. You should check out his channel if you're into this one. It's basically to get one of those generic screw nut bolt holders, and then as you go, just simply write in what your bolts are for. So headlight and bucket. Then you can pop the bolts in. And then you know where all of these bolts go, and you also know what car they go to if you label it at the top. And then once you've put these back on the car, you can just run around with some wax and grease remover and rub all of that off, and you start again. So yeah, top tip, and thanks Jeff. All right, so we're done. The underside looks, you know, a solid 7 out of 10. Now I would suggest that potentially some of this over time will sort of flake off and things like that, but it seems to have stuck to this pretty well. 100% not perfect, but at the end of the day, this is going to offer significantly more protection than it would have had if I hadn't done this. And at the point that I rebuild this car fully, this will be on a rotisserie, this entire area will be sandblasted, and it'll be recoated with something, probably with a product that offers a significantly higher level of protection. But if you're looking under here, say you've got the car up on a hoist or you're taking it over the pits, it looks pretty neat and pretty well taken care of. So that's what we're looking for. Now there are some bits at the back that I haven't done. I've basically done until underneath the rear seat sort of thing, but the diff and everything is in the way any further back. Now at some point I'm gonna have to redo those bushes that are on the diff, and I might have to, by the looks of things, do the seal in the diff snout. So yeah, it all looks pretty impressive under here as far as I'm concerned, so we can call this done. Let's jump up to the engine bay because that's done as well. We'll have a look at that. All right, so the bay is done, and I gotta say, I think it looks pretty awesome. It definitely looks original, and there's a lot of, I would say, patina on it. But the areas that I've done in the satin black, they don't look too over the top, and they're just sort of manky enough to fit right in without it looking like we have some really nicely finished areas in a really average, unmaintained bay. Now I will just note a couple of things. In the areas that there was significant amounts of bare metal, especially around the brake booster and on the firewall as well, I wanted to make sure these are protected. So they've been rust converted to within an inch of their life. The majority of the rust came off completely. And then what I did was let them dry a little bit, and they did get a little bit of surface rust, which is fine. I wanted that because then I've cleared over it. So it still looks like, you know, the paint's come off and it could be rusting, but it won't rust further than that because there's no air that can get into that rust. So yeah, those areas aren't perfectly protected, but to be honest, there's a whole bunch of other areas that I didn't clear coat, and these will all sort of age gracefully, if you will. Also, if you remember when we originally looked at this car at the top of the driveway, this panel was quite rusty. Now that was a new old stock panel that I put on the car, and it thoroughly disappointed the guy that I got it from when he saw it as rusty as it was. It was only surface rust, and it had like a coating on it, but it had been outside for a while. It had surface rusted. So I sprayed a bunch of rust converter on it, and then when I did that and hosed it off, about 90% of the paint came off with it. So I decided just to do a complete flex. I cleaned off the rest of the paint, and then I just clear coated it. So yeah, this is full bare metal, and it's just had a layer of, or 2 layers of clear over it. So it should be protected until I figure out what I want to do with this. And because clear coated bare metal is so baller, I had to then go through and throw some new zinc bolts in just for that Tommy FES spec. Now, some of you will be saying, that's a lot of work. Why didn't you just paint the bay, scuff the bay and paint the bay? Well, there's a couple of reasons. First, I don't know what I want to do with this car in general. This might be a patina car at the end of the day. We might blend in some of the paints or something, but in the engine bay, it is a pain to get paint off. So the last thing that I wanted to do was throw on some random color and then a bunch of clear that I'm just gonna have to remove later if I want this to ever be refinished properly. So yeah, I've put the minimal amount of material on, and as I said, with the black, don't worry about that, because I think once we get the battery in there and we have an engine in here, you're really not going to see any of this. It was mainly these areas here that would have attracted attention because they were that red and yellow paint. But this should hopefully just blend into the background. That is the plan. So yeah, basically we've got a finish, which, surprise, surprise, is going to do for now. So let's jump back to the workbench and I will tell you what the overall plan for this thing is. Okay, so you've all officially met Doofer now. Like I said, that was going to be a very long-term project for me. It was going to be a full strip down, full restoration. I was going to keep it forever, so originality wasn't super important to me, but certainly being period correct was. Now, because I started the channel with Violet Crumbles, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to run back to that one anytime soon, because having first gen Celica after first gen Celica after first gen Celica is probably a bit more than even the biggest Celica fans want to see. So I do want to mix things up a bit. But I still wanted to make sure that that car was firstly protected from the weather, because at the moment it is sitting out in the rain. The bottom line is fading paint and cracked paint is a recipe for disaster in terms of rust. as we've seen on Crumbles, and I didn't want to see Doofer fall into that same state of disrepair. So yeah, I was definitely going to be doing some work on it, but in looking more closely at it and seeing the condition that the interior is in and the limited amount of rust that we've got at the moment, I think it's actually a really good candidate for a quick rebuild that will get it back on the road, registered and licensed, and if I'm driving it, the level to which it's likely to degrade over the coming years is much, much smaller than having parked up on my property. We are calling it Doofer. It's gonna do for now, and you guys will get to see the contrast between that build and Violet Crumbles. Now obviously Violet Crumbles is a much bigger investment of time, not only because of the level of rust that's in Violet Crumbles, but also just the level to which I'm gonna take it. You know, I am stripping everything back to bare metal. We're recoating everything. We're gonna have a nut and bolt restoration there from the ground up, whereas Doofer is just gonna be get something on the road that looks good, that I can be proud to drive every day and even take to the occasional car shows so I can get out and meet you guys. So yeah, stick around for that one because I think it's gonna be a really interesting build. It will be done in parallel with Violet Crumbles, so we're just gonna alternate back and forwards. I know this is the 4th episode in this series straight, and we're gonna have 2 more to come. But then I will be going back to Violet Crumbles because I do want to concentrate on getting that rear end sorted out and then getting the underbody finally finished so we can get that thing back on its wheels and be mobile again, because I need this garage. There's other things that I need to do here other than Violet Crumbles. So yeah, stick around because I think we've got an interesting few months coming up. Hit the like button if you're excited about the Doofer project, and leave a comment below maybe and tell me what you would work on and what you would leave if it was your car that you were just trying to get running and on the road. And if you're new to the series and you like first gen Celicas, I'd highly recommend you go and watch our very much more detailed but still good series on Violet Crumbles, our RA28, and I'll also put either the next episode in this series or some of our super content or anything else down here. Other than that, I just want to say thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on The Build Room. Bye for now.